Hey guys, Technicosm here. It's been a while since I've done this, but I've decided that now I feel like I'm in a good place to bring back my idea of doing a series of tutorials, kind of just covering everything in FL Studio. I did one ages ago on my old channel, dubstep tutorial for nubs and scrubs, and that was not the best, especially because at that time, although I had made quite a few dubstep tracks, it was still, it's still like this now, but especially then, it was very hard for me to consistently get anything I could be happy with. I often just kind of tried for a long time until I got something I was happy with. So the tutorial wasn't, and it didn't end up being that good, especially because I was using Massive, because when I was making the tutorial I'd just gotten Massive, and I'm not gonna lie, I never really fully understood how Massive worked. I just knew I just had feels, you know. I got a feel for when I did this, it made a sound that sounded like this, so it wasn't the best idea. Now I actually have a very fundamental knowledge of a lot of synths, like I understand how most of them work and what I'm actually doing when I'm turning a knob. I wanted to do a tutorial, but as well as this, as you can tell by the title, I'm not just going to cover sound design, because I also want to cover a bit of music theory. Now, the music theory isn't going to be as long, because I'm not an expert on music theory. I am basically just going off of stuff that is both self-taught and stuff that I just learned in school. And so that means that I'm not going to get into super complex stuff, but there are a surprising amount of people out there, and I mean, I can't blame them, because I was almost one of them, who just literally don't know anything about music theory, who literally don't understand how notes come together. I mean, I say that as if I'm insulting them, but I mean, quite literally, when I started, I did not even know scales existed, and everything I made sounded terrible. So, you may have noticed that our FL Studio here already has something in it. Right, so this is actually a little bit awkward. This is being recorded after the second and the third episode. I'd already recorded this episode ages ago, and I've only now just gone back to find the recording, and I'm like, hang on a minute, where is it? And it's just not there. Don't remember ever messing with any of the files in my videos folder, and somehow it's just not there, which means it's gone. Now, luckily, what I have here isn't gone, but that does mean that sadly you did kind of miss out on the recording of me doing this kind of naturally. But I can still talk about what I have, and one merit of this is it will make the video a lot shorter, that I'm not sitting here in real time making this up on the spot. What we ended up coming up with is this. So, okay, let's talk about how we got to this point. So, the first thing that I did was I was talking about scales. So, I mentioned those briefly before. Now, most of you I imagine know what a scale is, but just in case you don't, I will explain. A scale is basically a set of usually 7, but it doesn't have to be 7, notes that you stick to in music. Usually you pick 7 notes that you use, and and then the other 5 you just never play those notes as long as you're sticking to that scale. And that might seem like a weird idea, but it makes it so that your music sounds way better. Trying to compose without scales is just a complete, you're just rolling dice. You can come up with something very unique and very good by doing that, but if you do, it will be freak luck, most likely. It is going to be very unlikely that you will do that just with pure skill. But hey, I don't know everything. Maybe you can outsmart me. Maybe you can prove me wrong. But I've never been able to get much good out of that. Especially any kind of harmonies or chords will be impossible. Let's quickly go over what I mean by harmonies or chords, because again, those are two things that I imagine you at least have a vague idea of, but just in case your idea is a little bit off, I'll make sure we are absolutely on the same page. A harmony is when you have 2 notes playing at the same time that are both different pitches. Well, I don't think they technically have to be different pitches, but generally they're different pitches. So a C and a G is a harmony. And obviously a C and A and a C and F, and you get the point. And a chord is anything that is more than 3 notes. Technically you can have 2-note chords, but usually when you hear someone talk about chords, they'll be talking about 3 different notes or more being played at the same time. They probably won't be talking about 2 notes at the same time being played at once, because that's usually considered a harmony, but it depends. I'm pretty sure technically a chord is just any amount of notes played at the same time, but since this harmony is always 2, it just makes more sense to say a harmony for 2 and a chord for 3 or more. Anyway, so you may, if you just messed around on a keyboard before, think that these black notes are no-goes. They're a bit quiet because of the way this works. Anyway, you may think that hitting these black notes just sounds bad, because I mean, if you've messed around on a keyboard before, you've probably done something like this before. And obviously that last bit doesn't sound quite right. You get the point. It usually sounds wrong when you hit a black note. Well, let me actually explain that. That is not actually because the black notes sound bad. They can actually sound really nice. Case in point. Well, that sounds beautiful. However, I'm actually hitting the black notes there, which, again, you probably thought, oh, they just sound bad. Well, the reason for that is that when you hit the black notes, you're going out of scale, because usually the first thing you do when you see a keyboard is you press all the white notes. Now, you might notice there are 7 white notes and 5 black notes, which means if you're using just the white notes, you're actually unknowingly already giving yourself a scale. That scale is called C major. And that is, of course, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then back to C. Now, you may be wondering, why do we start at C? I don't know, we just do. This C note here, in fact, C5, as it's known on here, because there are loads and octaves, which is a whole scale from like this C to that C, that's an octave. It goes really high up and really low down. But this right here, this C is in the middle, so it's called middle C. And most compositions will start around middle C. So anyway, so in that case, you'd be starting from C major, and you would be avoiding these notes, and you're in a scale. So the first thing we have to do is pick a scale, and I eventually decided on something that's a little bit weird, but I think it will help you to actually grasp this idea, because I think it'll make it much easier for you to make stuff that sounds nice. The obvious decision is to either go with a major or minor scale. So if you click on this little stamp icon over here, we can go on major here, we can go on minor harmonic or minor melodic, which is somewhere here. I feel like I'm going right past it. Yeah, here. And there's also minor natural. These 3 are the only ones I would worry about, and even then, I would usually just stick to one of them. I usually stick to minor harmonic. Honestly, which minor you pick doesn't matter that much. It usually only makes a 1-note difference, and they all sound pretty similar. I imagine there's only some situations where it's super, makes matters. The only other kind of scale I'm going to talk about for now is pentatonic. That might sound a bit, oh god, what's that? But I just thought I should cover this quickly, since it's a really simple scale, and it's actually quite easy to use. So if you're struggling, it might actually be easier for you to use a pentatonic scale. A pentatonic scale is called pentatonic because pent obviously means 5, like a pentagon. And it's basically a scale that uses 5 notes instead of 7. So all minor pentatonic is C minor, except they took out 2 of the notes. So, as you can see, they got rid of the D, and I imagine in one of the 9 scales, this B is like an A sharp instead or something like that, which is probably why there's a bit of a weird difference here, but anyway. But as you can see, yeah, so you probably already know that minor scales sound sad and major scales sound happy. Obviously, there's more to it than that, but that's generally how it works. Well, here's the thing. When I was picking my scale, when I first got into music, I kind of got into this in a weird way, because while most people would start making stuff in C major, just because, again, these black notes probably scare them at this point, I actually started with C sharp harmonic minor, which is... which is a weird way to start. Only, it turns out this isn't C sharp harmonic minor. This is actually E major, except that I started from C sharp, so it sounds like it's supposed to be C sharp minor. C sharp harmonic minor is the same, except this B is a... But I don't know why I'm pronouncing this so weird. This B is a C. But this sounded better to me. It sounded a bit more ambiguous between whether it was supposed to be happy or sad, and that made it a lot more interesting to listen to. Obviously, there's more to it than that, but like, just in a general sense, I found it's easier to make something that sounds interesting going with these weird scales that technically should start from another note. So technically, as I said, this is E major, because E major is the exact same notes, except you start from E. And you can definitely tell that's kind of what a major scale sounds like. But as I say, I start from C sharp, and since C sharp minor happens to have all the notes of E major except one is off, it still sounds right. So it turns out then, because this is where I started from this scale, it's because from there I figured out what the other scales were. Only I figured them out incorrectly, because as I said, I was wrong about this. This wasn't harmonic minor. It was technically a major of something three notes up, which means that every other scale I figured out incorrectly. But actually, again, it sounded better that way. So this is a long explanation, but basically what I ended up deciding on is that I would do D minor, quotation marks, except it's not D minor, it's F major. Which, again, that probably sounds weird, but D minor would be this. And we're doing the same as this, except we're making it even easier, because we're not going to have this C sharp here, we're just going to make that C sharp a C. So the scale would be D, E, F, G, A sharp, C. When it should be, but I want it to be. And this is the same as the other one. We should technically be starting from F here, and this should be F major. But since we're starting from D, it sounds like it's D minor, and it's very close to being D minor, but it isn't technically. Also, this makes it easier for you to remember as a beginner, because now this is literally your C major, except instead of a B, you have an A sharp. Instead of starting from C, you start from D. So yeah, so this isn't hard for you to remember the notes for. So just remember not to use B and to use A sharp instead, and then the rest of the black keys you can forget about. This is also a good note, I think, to pick for this tutorial, because I did want to, even though I did want to have a scale that's easy to remember, I also wanted it to be a scale that did at least use one black note, again, to really give you the confidence that they're not something to be scared of. So anyway, so from there, let's start making our chords. You don't have to start with the chords, but I would start with the chords. So, basically, this right here, you don't have, technically, to start with the first note in the scale, but we're going to start with the first note in the scale because it's easier that way. Again, technically this isn't really even the first note in the scale because of the whole, technically this should be F major thing, but you know, just stick with D for now. In fact, just a minute, let me get back, yeah, that was the rhythm I had. So, first I made a triad in the scale. Now what's a triad? A triad is just a name for a very simple chord. It is where you take the first note in the scale, the third note in the scale, so this would be the second and that would be the third, and the the fifth note in the scale, so that'd be the fourth and this would be the fifth. And it just sounds right. It's not particularly crazy or anything, but it sounds nice and it sounds like it should be there. Then from there, I decided that this wasn't quite interesting enough. In fact, it technically didn't really happen into this order, but eventually I realised I wanted to spice this up a bit, and I decided to make this a seventh chord. Well, what's a seventh chord? It's the same as a triad, except you add one more note on top, and you have the same thing where you go to the next note in the scale, you skip that one, and then you go to the one after that, which would be C in this case. Beautiful. Seventh chords tend to sound very emotional. There's actually a reason for that. We're going to get to that very soon. I don't think I covered it in melody, because I think I covered it in my first video, so I'm going to restate it here. Hopefully I'm not repeating myself later when I get to the melody. But we'll get to that soon. That's the chord we got for now. And also, I thought that sounded a bit boring, so for rhythm, I just realised I haven't really talked about these tools. A lot of them are self-explanatory, so I'll quickly go over them. The draw tool is the one I've been using so far. You obviously click it, it puts in a note. You can stretch the length of the note here. You can right-click to get rid of it. If you double-click on the note, it'll come up with this little settings menu. Don't worry about most of this stuff. In fact, yeah, I don't really think any of these are important for you to know, because they're all pretty niche. The only thing I would say is this little velocity thing might be important for some people if you're using this less as a way to produce electronic music and more as a way to kind of have replications of performance-like pieces, because this is mostly for expression kind of stuff. The note velocity is essentially how hard are you hitting the note. Only, of course, we aren't technically hitting a note, we're telling a computer to hit a note. Now, it's basically like volume, but the reason why it isn't called volume is because with some instruments and VSTs and all that, they might react differently to velocity, because obviously if you hit a note harder on a piano, it does make it louder, but it doesn't just make it louder, it also changes the sound in other ways, and it might try to simulate that. So I think that's what's up with the velocity. But other than that, I think I'll just kind of leave this. You can guess what pitch would be anyway. Panning is like the left or right ear. You can make it come out just the left ear or just the right ear. So yeah. You can just close that. So yeah. If you need to zoom in or zoom out, you can use this little box over here. That little bar that shows up when you zoom in close enough is the volume of each note. Sorry, the velocity of each note. I'm getting them mixed up already. So yeah. So the paint tool is just like the draw tool, I think, except there's some like exceptions to it. Yeah, so you can't, with the draw tool, if I put this F here and then this here, I can overlap them. With the paint one, you can't. Also, you don't hear the note when you place it. I think there are some other differences with the paint one. You can't drag a note when you place it. Personally, I just feel like the paint tool is just like the draw tool, except it feels less good to control, so I just stick to the draw tool, but you might prefer the paint tool. I don't remember if there's more differences, I don't think there is. Painting drum sequencer mode. Not sure, to be honest, I've never really used this tool. Delete, pretty self-explanatory. Yeah, you can just right-click to do that though. Mute. This one's an important one to know, not because you're going to be using this tool this often, but just it's a very easy mistake to accidentally mute something and then have no idea what's going on. So if you click and hold while you have mute, these notes have gone grey now, and they're not making any noise. You need to make sure you select this mute tool and then click on them again, and that'll do that. We'll get to this tool in a second. This is the reason why I'm talking about all these tools, is because I want to use this tool. This is probably the most important tool besides drawing. You click on this and you create a box, and everything in that box gets selected. A little tip as well. In almost every application, if you want to select more than one of something, but to do that, you have to also put things in the box you don't want. And it'd be much easier if you just created two boxes. Like imagine, say there's a note here. Say I want to take all of this except that G note. I can't do that because, you know, the box will always encapsulate the G note. If I get this, what you can do is you can select the first one, and then if you hold shift while you select the second one, it won't unselect the first one. So you can use that when selecting things. And when we're talking about shortcuts, just a quick one. Again, this works on almost every program, but in case you didn't know, you can press Ctrl-C to copy what you have selected and Ctrl-V to paste it, and that way we can copy our chords and paste them in, and now every time I press Ctrl-V, it will give me that. So anyway, so this tool right here, the slice tool, will essentially slice a gap here, and we're going to slice these notes up like that to create the rhythm that we had earlier. Just be careful to slice in a straight line, because you can slice kind of like this. And you might be able to create some interesting stuff with that, but don't do it unintentionally, obviously. So yeah, next we take the same chord, and I find that definitely try and experiment. I just want to make this clear right now. Whenever you make any kind of music, you got to understand that just about every recommendation and rule you are given is breakable. You can break it, you just have to do other things to compensate for the fact you're breaking a rule. So basically I would say that you stick to the rules that I'm telling you if you're nervous, but if you're feeling pretty confident and you think that what I'm telling you is holding back, then feel free, of course, to break the rules I'm telling you, because some of these rules are going to be a bit restrictive and make it hard to make original things, but it makes it a lot easier to get a start, and that's mainly what I'm focused on right now, is getting you started. So I would say almost always after you do this, your next chord wants to be the same except 2 notes down, because that way it lines up nicely like this. The only note that's changed is this top one, and even if this wasn't a 7 chord, it'd be the same. The only one note had changed, that being the top one. So yeah, that makes it all nice, and it sounds like a nice transition because you're not changing too drastically. Wait, hang on a minute. Oh, do I? There's me breaking my own rule. That B is not in the scale. And now we just need to quickly cut that up to make it fit. So from there, essentially, I took the same kind of chords, and I'm going to kind of stop recreating it because we already have it here. And I started moving it around by different amounts, and then I just moved it down 1 to get. And then this last chord is where I changed it a bit. As you can see, the top note is actually the same as the bottom note, that's why, and that makes it sound kind of less interesting, because it almost sounds like, it's a bit like, almost like, it sounds nicer to have 2 of the same note, just an octave up or an octave down, be played, but then it also sounds more boring, because it's like, there's less interesting kind of harmonic stuff going on. So it's something you want to do when you've got a kind of awkward chord. It's fine to do this to make it sound more pleasant, but it's something I would avoid usually when doing these kind of chords. To make it more interesting here, you can see I kind of changed the note for a bit and then changed it back. I just nudged this up 1. As you can see, this just goes 2 up from this one. Now, time to actually talk about something. You may be wondering, why do we do this weird thing where we always leave 1 kind of gap for a note? Like here we've left 2, but still, we're leaving these small little gaps in notes. Why are we doing it like that? Well, this last part is going to be where I get a little bit more kind of weird, but I think this is a good thing to try and explain to you at an early stage. So, pitch and all that, like all these notes, all these are different frequencies, which basically means that when you press this, if you look at this box up here, that's called an oscilloscope, and it makes a wave. You can see the same thing is repeated multiple times. Every single time one of those finishes, like it goes to its start point, it makes the whole shape, and then it finishes and it starts over. That's called an oscillation. If it does that 1 time a second, that's 1 hertz. That's a pitch of a frequency of 1 hertz. And all pitches are frequencies. Now, C5 or middle C, I believe, is 500 hertz. Might not be entirely right on that, but just the general idea is these shapes are made hundreds of times a second. To be accurate, if this is 500 hertz, that would be 500 times a second. So all this really is how many times a second these things are making these shapes. Well, obviously they're not shapes towards their sounds, but that's how we visually represent them, because obviously it's a bit hard to just say these sounds and all that's a bit vague. We can get a bit more specific by looking at what these look like when we kind of represent it on a graph. So essentially, although it's kind of a bit weird to get your head around, you could be listening to the loudest sound ever, but if it never moves, if it's just always like right at the top of this graph or right at the bottom, because this is a bit of a weird graph where the middle means 0 and the bottom means and the top mean maximum. if it was like, even if this line was moved all the way up to the top or all the way up to the bottom, if it just stayed there, we wouldn't hear anything. Yes, it would be an extremely loud sound, but it would have a frequency of 0 because the line isn't moving. And of course, human ears can only hear frequencies that are so high / so low. They've only got a certain range, so they won't be able to hear it. Well, maybe it would be noticeable somehow, but I don't think so. So, yeah. So basically, that means that all of these kind of oscillate a certain amount of times. And the way that things sound nice is the relationships and the way it ships, it fits together. Like having these oscillations happen a certain number of times. So the reason why a C and a C work together so easily, even if they can sound a bit boring, is because every single time you move this up or down an octave, you are, if you move it up, you're doubling the pitch, and if you move it down, you're halving the pitch. So that's half the pitch of that, and this is double the pitch. Now, what are these ones in between then? Well, I don't know all of them, but I can tell you that the 5th note in the scale, which would be G if we were in C major, that would be 1.5 times the pitch. And you can tell that's got a really nice harmony. It's called, I think, oh no, sorry, I'm talking about something different, I think. No, yeah, perfect 5th, I think it's called. So yeah, so in our scale, that would be D and A. Oh, sorry, if you press Shift and up, you can move things up 1 note if you've selected them. And down obviously works too. Control and down and Control note will move them up and down octaves. So that's how we kind of get the basis for our chord, but then we need a 3rd note, and it only makes sense we kind of put them in the middle of this gap. Now, why are we leaving these gaps? Why don't we just have D, E, F as a chord? Oh. Well, that doesn't sound good, does it? Well, this is the thing. When you have notes closer together, they sound nowhere near as good. They can be used well for things like horror pieces, but in a conventional sense, it sounds horrible to put notes really close together. But why is that? It doesn't seem to make much sense. And this is why you won't see a scale that's just like, well, maybe you will for some weird reason, but you won't tend to see a scale that's just like C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, that's 6, 7. Like, this technically could be a scale, it's 7 notes, but, like, this is not going to sound nice. Like, you could use it, but then what if we try and make a chord in this scale? Let's try it in this scale. It's not terrible, but, like, it's not great either. So, yeah, there are issues with putting things close together, and the reason for that is because the ratio isn't nice. So like our brain, things that sound nice to our brain, nice and harmonious, are things that fit together well. So this sounds nice because we know every time this oscillates twice, this will oscillate 3 times. So although it's a bit, whoa, these don't match up at first, very quickly our brain realizes, oh no, I can just simplify this as this note is just 3 for every 2 of this note, which is much easier to understand. Then this still works, but gets a bit iffy because I don't know the exact thing, but it's probably close to about a quarter. So it's like, okay, right, so every 5, that's 4. Sorry, every 4, that's 5. But then when we get to this point, it's like, ooh, now it's going to be quite a lot of oscillations before these things match up again. I don't know how the differences, the ratios for like all these frequencies, so I can't say for sure, but it might not even like, it might take a long time for these two to link up correctly, and that makes it way harder for our brain to quickly rationalize how to think of the frequencies of these, which makes it sound less pleasant to us. And then once they're literally like that, it takes a long time for them to line up again. So yeah, so we come to this conclusion of having chords like this because obviously the first thing we see is the perfect 5th. That sounds really nice. And then this is just the kind of midway point between these. And then 7th. The 7th chord sounds so emotional. This is what I said I was going to get to earlier. They sound so emotional because technically this C right here You can think of it as being down here. It's not the exact same, but it's kind of similar to it being down here, because all this note is the same as this, but doubled. So it has the same kind of idea of, oh, these two clash. They clash a little bit, but they don't clash so much that it ruins the kind of harmoniousness of it. And because none of the other notes clash, it's got this weird kind of, it's harmonious, but there's also this one note that's a little bit closer than it should be. Because it's impossible to have 4 notes in a 7-note scale that aren't like this close together unless you have some weird spacing in the scale. So yeah. That's how it has that emotional sound to it. In fact, this is another reason why I don't go in minor. In minor, this C would be here, which would mean that it's got a D, C sharp kind of thing going on here, which sounds, again, doesn't sound good. Now, with all the other stuff, it sounds alright. It definitely sounds minor. But I would prefer this. Sounds much better. So yeah. So because this thing repeats, essentially, usually the way you want to kind of think about ending a chord progression or music, if you're talking about like normal music theory, there are kind of types of chords, and I didn't get too far into this, but I did learn a little bit about cadences. So this right here, this chord right here, if we ignore this top note because we made it a 7th chord, but let's pretend we didn't make it a 7th chord and these top notes don't exist. If it was just 3 notes, as I said, that's called a triad. But this particular triad is called a tonic chord. It's called the tonic because it's a triad that starts from the first note in the scale. Now if we have a triad that starts from the 4th note in the scale, which would be G, and then goes to B, and then D. So a GBD chord, that starts from the 4th note in the scale, that's called the subdominant chord. And then if we start from the 5th note, it's called the dominant chord. And the 5th note would be A, C, E. And essentially, the perfect way, in quotation marks, to end a piece is to go from a dominant chord to the tonic chord. So to go from a triad starting from the 5th note to a triad starting from the 1st note. So that would be... So that's a perfect cadence in this thingy scale. Now obviously it doesn't sound bad, but you also might think, well that isn't perfect. Yeah, the name isn't quite right. Because yeah, it sounds complete like that basically is the point. It's not really the point is that that's the best way to end it. The point is that it makes it sound like that's done, that's dusted, there's nothing left to it. Whereas if you have the subdominant chord, that's called an imperfect cadence, because it sounds kind... did I say it was GBD earlier? Man, I'm forgetting about this A sharp. Because this should sound kind of finished, but like there's still more to it. Actually, to be fair, that still sounds pretty complete. I don't know. So anyway, so basically what I did here is this chord progression, we want to loop it over and over and over. So we don't want it to sound like it's finished. But at the same time, it doesn't sound nice for it to sound like it's never ever going to finish. So what you kind of want to do if you're going to be repeating your chord progression, which you will be doing in EDM kind of tracks, of just about any genre and any kind of electronic genre, you will want to kind of tease them a bit. Make it sound kind of like it's ending, but also that it's never going to end. So here... it kind of does that because this note is, this chord is getting kind of similar to the first chord we started with. So it transitions well into starting from here again. Now, I only showed the first half of this chord progression because the second half starts out by copying what we had. But then it does change. Usually, I would only change the last 2 chords, but in this particular case, it didn't sound right unless I changed all 3 of these chords. But yeah, the usual structure I would go for if you're making your own chord progression is to copy what you did in the first 4 bars, and then anywhere from the last bar to the last 2 bars to the last 3 bars change on the second time round. And you probably want the chord progression to total 8 beats in length, like go up to here. I found that less than that tends to sound annoyingly repetitive, and more than that tends to sound not repetitive enough, as dumb as that sounds, but it's actually it actually can be a problem. Anyway, so here I actually found that it didn't sound right unless I moved it up 2. So this is the same as before, except we're moving it up 2 instead of down 2. Here we get to the subdominant chord, except technically it's not the subdominant because we've got a 7th note on it, but still. And here, this is a good way to end this because this is the dominant chord, except we've got this A up here. Only the A is the same as the bottom note of this chord, so it is basically like the dominant chord. And ending on the dominant chord, and as I said, the perfect ending to something, the perfect cadence is supposed to be a dominant chord to a tonic chord. This sounds great because the next chord after this ends and it restarts is the tonic chord. So this chord should mark the end of the piece, but obviously it's going to repeat, and it's fine because the point at which we play this is once it's already started back up again. You can tell by the rhythm that's not the end because, well, you know, you've now gone into the next bar, you've run out of time. If I played this chord from the beginning, right here, it might sound like, oh yeah, it's actually done. But you can tell, oh no, it's not quite done, but it sounded like it was about to be done, you know. It's just a nice way you can kind of make it sound satisfying to have it repeat. So yeah, that's how I got to these chords. It's a little bit of a ramble, but I imagine you'll find this quite useful if you're, well, trying to make chords, because it can be very difficult. One thing that I definitely will point out as well, with all music, I'm going to talk about this more in the melody section, so I'll try to keep this short, but with almost all music in terms of notes, you're almost always, when you got nothing, you're going to be slamming your head against the wall, thinking, how do I even do anything? And once you do it, you'll think, well, obviously I should have done that. That works so... that just obviously is the way it should be. It's kind of just weird. Like, when I was making this, I didn't think to myself, oh, yeah, I'm going to have D minor 7ths, except they're not D minor. Like, that's not how I started. I was just like, let me pick a scale. I like this scale. And I was like, well, actually, let's make it not have that C sharp. It doesn't sound nice. And I can tell you about this whole, well, now it's technically F major, but we're still going to treat it like it's D minor. And then from there, I just kind of messed around a bit. Oh yes, there is actually one more thing I want to talk about. I'm glad I didn't end the video there. I didn't do much of this here, but just so you know, do not be afraid to try moving these around a bit. It's more, if your piece sounds too basic, you should definitely think of taking some of these chords and shifting these notes around a bit. Like, obviously that doesn't sound great because it doesn't work for this kind of piece, but for something a bit more emotional, a chord like that might be interesting. This might be a bit pushing it, but... like, that's interesting. It doesn't work perfectly, but even though that's technically like there, which should sound bad, it does sound kind of interesting. So yeah, definitely experiment if you think what you're making sounds like it works, but it also sounds boring. Just, you know, don't go too far out unless it sounds really, really, really boring unless you go too far out, or you feel just confident going too far out there. Anyway, enough of me rambling. Hopefully you'll learn something from this. I'll see you in the next one where I actually talk about melody.